The phone rang at 4:13 in the morning, and before Caroline Hayes even opened her eyes, she already knew something was wrong. Nobody calls at that hour to say something good. She reached across the nightstand in the dark, fumbling for her phone while her heart pounded hard enough to make her dizzy. Beside her, Ethan shifted under the blankets, but did not wake up. It was her younger brother, Mason. His voice cracked the second she answered. Their mother had collapsed trying to get out of bed in Charlotte. The doctors said it was a severe inner ear infection mixed with bronchitis and dangerously unstable blood pressure. She was awake now, but confused, weak, and unable to safely stay alone for at least a week. Caroline sat frozen on the edge of the bed, listening while cold panic slowly settled into her chest. Mason could not leave Arizona. His wife was 8 months pregnant and already on partial bed rest. Their sister was overseas with the Air Force, which meant there was really only one option. Caroline. Of course, she would take her mother in.
There was never a question about that.
The real knot forming in her stomach had nothing to do with hospitals or medications. It had everything to do with the man sleeping beside her. Ethan had a habit whenever life became inconvenient for someone else. He would go very quiet first. Not angry, not loud, just calculating. Then came the question. The one that always sounded reasonable until you heard the coldness underneath it. When Caroline finally woke him and explained the situation, Ethan stared at the ceiling for several long seconds before speaking. How long are we talking about here? Not is she okay? Not what does she need? Just inconvenience. And lying there in the dark beside her husband of 6 years, Caroline suddenly remembered how differently things had looked when Ethan's own father stayed with them after knee surgery 3 years earlier. Caroline drove to Charlotte the next morning under a gray October sky that looked heavy enough to break open at any moment. Her mother, Linda Parker, looked smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing Caroline noticed when she walked into the hospital room. Linda had always carried herself with quiet strength. Even at 72, she still volunteered twice a week at church and insisted on mowing her own lawn. But now her silver hair looked flattened against her face, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. "Oh, honey, I hate putting you through this," Linda whispered as Caroline helped her into the car. "You are not putting me through anything," Caroline said immediately. But during the drive back to Raleigh, her mother apologized at least 6 more times. For coughing, for needing the bathroom, for asking to stop because the antibiotics made her nauseous. By the time they pulled into the driveway almost 4 hours later, Caroline was emotionally exhausted. Ethan opened the front door before they reached it. He smiled politely. Too politely. The kind of smile people use with coworkers they secretly dislike. "Hey, Linda," he said carefully. "Glad you made it." Caroline noticed he did not hug her mother for long. Just a quick, awkward pat on the shoulder before stepping back. Inside, Caroline had prepared everything. Fresh sheets, extra blankets, a humidifier beside the bed, a small vase of grocery store flowers. Linda's eyes immediately filled with tears. "Oh, Caroline," she whispered, "you didn't have to do all this." Before Caroline could answer, Ethan leaned casually against the doorway. "Well," he said with a short laugh, "you know Caroline. Once she gets an idea in her head, she goes all in." The words sounded harmless, but the tone underneath them landed differently. Caroline felt it immediately. That subtle irritation. That quiet accusation that this situation was already becoming too much. That night she made homemade chicken and rice soup because it was the one thing Linda always made whenever someone in the family got sick. The smell filled the kitchen for hours. Ethan walked in during dinner preparations, lifted the lid off the pot, and frowned. "Wow," he muttered. "Smells like a nursing home cafeteria in here." Caroline forced a small laugh. "It's easy on her stomach." "Yeah," he replied. "I guess." At dinner, Linda ate slowly, still weak and dizzy from the medication. Halfway through the meal, she accidentally made a soft slurping sound while sipping the broth. Ethan smirked. "I forgot sick people get really loud with soup." The room went completely still. Linda immediately lowered her spoon. "Oh goodness," she said softly. "Sorry about that." Caroline felt heat rise into her chest. Ethan laughed like it was nothing. "Relax," he said.
I'm joking.
But later that night, while helping her mother back into the guest room, Caroline realized something uncomfortable. She had spent the entire dinner watching Ethan's moods more carefully than her mother's condition. The second day started quietly. That was almost worse. Caroline woke early to organize Linda's medications before work. Antibiotics, blood pressure pills, motion sickness tablets for the vertigo. She lined them carefully beside the guest bathroom sink with handwritten notes, so her mother would not get confused. Around 8:30, Ethan walked into the bathroom, then immediately walked back out. A few seconds later, Caroline heard the bedroom closet doors slamming. "What's wrong?" she asked carefully. Ethan rubbed his forehead dramatically. "There's stuff everywhere in there." "It's just Mom's medication." "Yeah, I know. It feels like we're living in a hotel." Caroline stared at him for a moment. Her mother had been there less than 24 hours. By the third day, the tension inside the house had become impossible to ignore. Linda mostly stayed on the couch with a blanket over her legs, drifting in and out of sleep while old sitcom reruns played softly in the background. Caroline lit a eucalyptus candle to help with her breathing. When Ethan got home from work, he stopped in the middle of the living room and made a face. "Why does it smell like an assisted living center in here?" Before anyone answered, he walked straight to the windows and pushed them open. Cold October air rushed through the house instantly. Linda pulled the blanket tighter around herself, but said nothing. Caroline quickly grabbed another blanket from the hallway closet and wrapped it around her mother's shoulders. Ethan acted like he did not even notice. The fourth day hit Caroline harder than the others. Mostly because it looked so small on the surface. Ethan came home carrying takeout bags from a steakhouse Caroline liked. 2 meals, not 3. He stopped when he saw Linda sitting at the table. "Oh," he said casually. "I didn't think she'd want anything." Linda smiled immediately. "That's all right, sweetheart. I'm not very hungry anyway." Caroline gave her mother the steak and ate dry toast over the sink later that night while pretending she was too tired for dinner. Something inside her started cracking then. Not loudly, quietly, like ice weakening under pressure. But day 5 was the moment she would never forget. Caroline had been trapped in Zoom meetings nearly all afternoon. By the time she finally stepped out of her office, she heard glass clinking in the kitchen. Linda stood at the counter gripping the edge with both hands. Her face looked pale. A single coffee cup sat beside the sink. "Oh, Mom." Caroline rushed forward. "What are you doing?" Linda gave a weak, embarrassed smile. "I just wanted to rinse my cup. I feel terrible sitting around all day while everybody else works." Then Caroline noticed the living room television blasting sports commentary. Ethan sat on the couch watching ESPN with a beer in his hand. He had been there the entire time. She almost fell. Caroline snapped after helping Linda back to the couch. Ethan barely looked away from the screen. "She's washing a cup, not climbing a mountain. She has vertigo. She's an adult. The doctor literally said she shouldn't be standing alone." Ethan finally muted the television and looked irritated instead of concerned. "Well, maybe you should supervise her better then." The sentence hit Caroline harder than yelling would have. Because he meant it. There was no misunderstanding left anymore. No stress excuse. No bad mood.
No temperiri frustración.
This was simply how he viewed her mother. An inconvenience. A disruption. A burden Caroline was failing to manage correctly. That night, while making tea for Linda, Caroline finally understood something people rarely talk about in unhappy marriages. Cruelty does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives disguised as jokes, as sighs, as forgotten meals, as tiny moments repeated, so often you slowly start convincing yourself they are normal. That was the real danger. Not one terrible moment, but hundreds of small ones. Like paper cuts that eventually make you bleed without noticing when it started. Later that evening, Linda quietly reached for Caroline's hand from the couch. "Honey," she whispered carefully, "maybe I should head home a little early. I don't want to be a burden." Caroline felt her throat tighten instantly, because for the first time all week, she realized her mother was not asking for herself. She was trying to protect her daughter. Linda left on the 7th day. Not because she was fully better. Not because the doctors cleared her. Because she could feel what was happening inside the house. That Saturday morning, Caroline loaded her mother's suitcase into the trunk while cold wind swept across the driveway. Linda moved slowly now, still dizzy when she turned too quickly, still coughing into tissues she tried hard to hide. The drive back to Charlotte felt much longer than the first one. Maybe because neither of them talked very much. At one point, Linda reached over quietly and rested her hand on Caroline's arm. "You look tired, baby." Caroline laughed softly.
Ay fine.
But even she could hear how fake it sounded. When they finally pulled into Linda's driveway, Caroline helped her mother up the porch steps one at a time. The old wooden railing creaked beneath them. At the front door, Linda suddenly stopped. She looked at Caroline for a long moment with the kind of sadness only mothers seem capable of carrying. "Honey," she said gently, "you don't have to tolerate everything just because you love someone." Caroline immediately shook her head. "It's not like that. Ethan's just stressed. Work has been rough lately." Linda said nothing at first. That silence hurt more than criticism would have. Finally, she smiled softly and brushed a strand of hair behind Caroline's ear the same way she had done when Caroline was little. "All right, baby," she whispered. But her eyes said she did not believe a word of it. Caroline cried almost the entire drive back to Raleigh. Still, when she walked through the front door that evening, Ethan greeted her like the difficult week was finally over. The house smelled like grilled steak and red wine. He wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed the top of her head. "Feels good to have the house back to normal," he said with a relieved laugh. Then he added the sentence Caroline would replay in her mind for months afterward. "Honestly, your mom seemed more comfortable back at her own place anyway." Caroline stood there silently in his arms. And for the first time in 6 years, comfort no longer felt the same thing as love. December arrived quietly. Too quietly. After Linda left, Ethan acted like the tension in the house had never happened. He became affectionate again. Easier to talk to. Helpful in small polished ways that almost made Caroline question her own memory. Almost. Then Christmas week arrived. And so did Patricia Hayes. Ethan's mother flew in from Connecticut every year on December 22nd and stayed until after New Year's. Caroline had hosted her for 6 straight Christmases. 6 years of carefully adjusted recipes. 6 years of buying special tea only Patricia liked. 6 years of listening to subtle comments disguised as compliments. "You keep the house so cozy for someone who works full-time. You're lucky Ethan is so patient with busy schedules. You younger women really do have a lot on your plates these days." Every sentence came wrapped in a smile sharp enough to cut paper. Still, Caroline always tried. This year she deep-cleaned the guest room for 2 full days. Fresh towels. Lavender lotion Patricia liked. Extra pillows. Her favorite almond cookies from a bakery 40 minutes away. Meanwhile, Ethan suddenly transformed into a completely different man. The same husband who complained about Linda's medication bottles now carefully adjusted the guest room thermostat before Patricia arrived because she preferred exactly 68 degrees. The same man who forgot Linda's dinner drove across town for Patricia's favorite cranberry scones before picking her up from the airport. The same husband who opened windows while Linda shivered under blankets now checked 3 times to make sure Patricia was warm. Enough. And Caroline noticed every single detail. Patricia arrived wearing a long cream coat and expensive leather gloves. Ethan practically jogged to carry her luggage inside. "Mom, you must be exhausted," he said warmly. His voice sounded softer around her.
"Kinda."
Caroline stood in the kitchen doorway watching him take Patricia's coat with both hands like she was royalty. Meanwhile, in October, Linda had apologized for existing. That first evening, Caroline made rosemary chicken with mashed potatoes and roasted vegetables. Patricia barely touched the carrots. "You know I've never liked cooked vegetables much," she laughed lightly. Ethan immediately leaned forward. "Want me to make you something else, Mom?" Caroline froze for half a second. In October, Linda had eaten dry toast because Ethan forgot she needed dinner. Now he was offering second meals because Patricia skipped carrots. Something cold moved through Caroline's chest. Not anger anymore. Clarity. After dinner, Patricia settled onto the couch with a blanket while Ethan poured her a small glass of port wine. "You relax," he told her. "You're a guest." Then he turned toward Caroline with a smile. "Babe, can you handle the kitchen tonight?" Patricia smiled apologetically. "Oh, sweetheart, I wish I could help, but traveling completely wipes me out." Caroline looked at the sink piled high with dishes. Then she looked at Ethan, the same man who watched Linda nearly collapse washing a coffee cup. And suddenly, every moment from October replayed inside her head at once. The soup comments, the cold windows, the forgotten dinner, the sighs, the jokes, the irritation every time her mother needed anything. Not once had Ethan looked at Linda with gentleness. Not once. But here he was carefully fluffing pillows for Patricia, like kindness came naturally to him. Because it did come naturally to him. That was the part Caroline finally understood. This was never about stress. Never about work. Never about inconvenience. Ethan was fully capable of patience. Fully capable of care. He simply believed his mother deserved compassion more than hers did. That realization changed something permanent inside her. Later that night, Caroline stood alone upstairs in their bedroom staring at the soft green wallpaper she had picked years earlier when they first bought the house. Downstairs, she could hear Ethan and Patricia laughing together over some old Christmas movie. For a long moment, she just stood there breathing. Then quietly, without tears or anger or drama, Caroline walked into the closet and pulled down the large black suitcase from the top shelf. And for the first time in years, the silence inside her finally felt peaceful instead of lonely. Caroline packed after midnight. Quietly. Methodically. Not like someone running away. Like someone finally waking up. Downstairs, the television had long since gone silent. Patricia was asleep in the guest room. Ethan had brushed his teeth, climbed into bed, and fallen asleep within minutes, completely unaware that his marriage was ending 10 feet away from him. Caroline folded sweaters into the suitcase, one at a time. Jeans. Work clothes. Her laptop charger. The framed photo of her and Linda at her college graduation. Then came the important things. Tax documents. Bank information. The deed to the condo she had owned before the marriage and thankfully never added Ethan's name to. For years she used to feel guilty about keeping that property separate. Tonight it felt like survival instinct. Around 1:30 in the morning, Caroline sat on the floor beside the open suitcase and stared at the wall for a long time. Not crying. Not angry. Just exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. Because once you finally see someone clearly, there is no way to unsee them again. The next morning she woke before sunrise and made coffee. She even prepared Patricia's tea exactly the way she liked it. Habit was hard to break. When Ethan walked downstairs in his robe, he stopped immediately after spotting the suitcase near the front door. "What's that?" Caroline took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "I'm leaving." He laughed automatically. Actually laughed. Like she had delivered a punchline wrong. Then his face slowly changed. "What do you mean leaving?" "I'm going to Charlotte." "For the day?" "No." The silence stretched between them. Ethan stepped closer now, lowering his voice carefully. "Caroline, what is this about?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then calmly, without raising her voice once, she started speaking. "When my mother was sick, you mocked the soup I made for her." Ethan immediately opened his mouth. She held up her hand. He stopped. "You opened windows while she sat freezing with bronchitis. You forgot to buy her dinner. You watched her almost fall in our kitchen and blamed me for not supervising her correctly." Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. "Oh my God, Caroline, are we seriously doing this right now?" "Yes," she answered quietly. "We are." He stared at her helplessly. "That's completely different." Caroline almost smiled. There it was. The sentence she knew was coming. "How?" "My mother is older. She's a guest. Christmas is different." Caroline nodded slowly. "You're right. It is different." Then she took a breath. "My mother spent 7 days apologizing for existing in this house. Your mother has been here less than 24 hours and you've treated her like royalty." Ethan's expression hardened slightly now. "You're overreacting." "No," Caroline said softly. I think I finally stopped underreacting. That sentence landed. She could see it in his face. For the first time in years, his usual tactics were not working.
No guilt. No confusión.
No emotional scrambling to comfort him. Just truth sitting plainly in the room between them. Then finally, after nearly a full minute of silence, Ethan asked the question that told Caroline everything she needed to know. What am I supposed to tell my mother? Not stay. Not please. Not I love you. Just embarrassment. Caroline picked up the suitcase handle. Tell her your wife went to take care of her mother, she said calmly. Then after a pause, she added the part that finally shattered whatever remained between them. Like a good husband should have done back in October. And with that, Caroline opened the front door and walked out into the falling snow. The drive to Charlotte felt different this time. In October, Caroline drove there carrying guilt, anxiety, and the constant pressure to keep everyone comfortable. Now she drove through soft falling snow with tears on her face and something unfamiliar slowly growing underneath the heartbreak. Relief. Not happiness. Not yet, but relief. Her brother Mason opened the front door before she even reached the porch. One look at the suitcase told him everything. He pulled her into a hug without asking questions. You're home, he said quietly. And for the first time in months, Caroline felt her shoulders relax. Linda sat in her favorite armchair near the window wrapped in a faded blue quilt. The moment she saw Caroline's swollen eyes, she understood immediately. Oh, baby, she whispered softly. Caroline knelt beside the chair and rested her head against her mother's lap like she had done as a little girl after nightmares. Linda simply stroked her hair.
No lectures. No judgment.
No, I told you so. Just love. Christmas that year was smaller than usual, and somehow better than any Caroline could remember. Mason flew back 2 days later with his oldest daughter. The house filled with cinnamon rolls, old music, and badly wrapped presents spread across the dining room table. Linda still tired easily, but color had started returning to her face. One morning she sat at the kitchen table teaching Caroline how to make her homemade chicken and rice soup again, even though Caroline already knew the recipe by heart. Neither of them mentioned why that mattered. Meanwhile, Ethan called constantly. At first the messages sounded emotional. Please talk to me. I miss you. We can fix this. Then came the guilt. My mother is devastated. You embarrass me. You ruined Christmas over one misunderstanding. By Christmas night, Caroline finally blocked his number. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Quietly. Like closing a door against cold weather. In January, she filed for legal separation. By February, she moved back into the condo she had owned before marriage. Thankfully, the renters had recently moved out. The apartment was smaller than the house in Raleigh. Smaller kitchen. Smaller closets. Smaller balcony. But the silence there felt completely different. No tension waiting when she walked through the door. No moods to manage. No careful monitoring of another person's irritation. Therapy helped her understand things she had spent years minimizing. How emotional manipulation often hides inside politeness. How people slowly abandon themselves trying to avoid conflict. How exhausting it becomes to constantly shrink your needs to protect someone else's comfort. One afternoon in early spring, Linda visited the condo for lunch. They sat together on the little balcony eating soup while warm Carolina sunlight filtered through the trees. Linda looked at her daughter carefully for a long moment before smiling. You look like yourself again. Caroline felt her throat tighten instantly, because she realized something painful. She had disappeared so slowly inside that marriage she never even noticed it happening. It has been 3 years since Caroline walked out of that house with a suitcase in one hand and her self-respect in the other. Sometimes people ask if she regrets leaving. The answer always surprises them.
No.
She regrets how long she stayed after realizing she was disappearing. That is different. Looking back now, Caroline understands the marriage did not collapse because of one cruel comment or one difficult holiday. It eroded slowly, one ignored feeling at a time. One swallowed disappointment at a time. One moment of silence after another moment that should have been confronted. That was the real danger. Not screaming fights. Not dramatic betrayals. Just the slow, steady habit of making herself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. The truth finally became impossible to ignore during those 7 days with her mother. Because when someone truly loves you, they do not make the people you love feel unwanted. They do not treat your pain like an inconvenience. And they certainly do not reserve kindness only for the people they personally value. That was the lesson Caroline carried with her. The issue was never soup, or guests, or stress. It was value. Who mattered? Who deserved patience? Who deserved gentleness? These days, Caroline keeps onions in every recipe she wants. She plays music loudly while cleaning her condo on Saturday mornings. She drives to Charlotte once a month for Linda's doctor appointments, and they still stop at the same roadside diner for coffee afterward. Sometimes they laugh so hard people stare at them. And Caroline no longer apologizes for taking up space in her own life. That may sound small to some people, but after years of walking on emotional eggshells, peace feels enormous. If there is one thing she wishes more people understood, it is this. Staying quiet to keep the peace eventually teaches people that your pain is acceptable. And little by little you start believing it too. Until one day you wake up and realize you cannot recognize yourself anymore. Love should never require you to abandon your dignity just to maintain harmony. Because love that costs your self-respect is not really love at all. It is rent. And eventually the price becomes too expensive to keep paying. If this story connected with you in any way, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a relationship where you slowly lost yourself trying to keep the peace? Sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest truths about the people around us. And sometimes walking away is not weakness. It is the first real act of self-respect. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need to hear this message today. Thank you for spending this time with Smart Revenge.